Hi and welcome. You're listening to an Asia Gaming Brief podcast. My name is Felix Ng. I'm joined by Montieth Illingworth, CEO of Montieth and Company, a cross-border corporate advisory that excels in special situations and issues that companies find themselves in. Montieth, thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much, Felix, for having me on. We have an interesting, what we call cross-border business. The U.S., MEA, and APAC, and we work with clients, not just with issues, but who are expanding their market share and looking for help in terms of communications on that.
I imagine that the last year with the pandemic and everything, there's been a lot of work for your company.
Yeah, indeed, that's true. We've got a category of clients, global companies that have contracted. They've done a good job, actually, at reducing costs and conserving cash, even through the troubles, refocusing their businesses. And then we have another category of companies that have taken this as an opportunity to raise money, expand market share. Those tend to be in technology-oriented sectors. So it's a real mix.
And it's great that you raised that, because I believe that the topic of our podcast today, we don't really want to focus so much on the doom and gloom and all the impacts that the pandemic has caused around the world, but you've actually found some light at the end of the tunnel that you just kind of touched on there, Monty. Do you mind just kind of talking about what you've seen?
Well, sure. I mean, I'm without aging myself too much, I'm old enough to have gone through 5 recessions. I do remember after the 91 recession, the early 90s, and people probably forget this, Amazon launched in 94, as did Facebook. Even before that, a decade before that, after the oil price shock of 1973, guess what happened? Microsoft and Apple, 2 years later, they launched. So you could go through each recession and find the similar kind of phenomenon, that when the recession works its way towards renewal for companies, for those who have made the right changes and preparations, it's a real opportunity. Harvard Business Review did a really, really interesting study in 2010, and that's 2 years after the worst recession since the Great Depression of the 30s. And they looked at the 3 recessions from 1980 to 2002. And their study said 17% of companies didn't survive, they just failed. 80%, this is really fascinating, 80% did not regain pre-recession growth rates. They basically either stalled after the recession or had very low growth rates. Only 9% flourished afterwards. So the study goes on, and it explains why those who flourished, why they did. And that's what's instructive now.
Right. So in your, from what you've seen, what has been that magic bullet for this 9% then?
So it's not being purely cost-cutting oriented and not being purely new investment oriented, as if you're completely changing your stripes and doing something totally different. It's a balance between cost cutting that increases efficiencies and therefore improves profit margins, and innovation, what they sort of call, focused or ruthless innovation, that says, invest in the innovative things you can do that you have a really good shot at moving the needle on. And that gets back to your point about what the new needs are now and the new opportunities for companies anywhere in the world, whether it's in gaming or it's in retail or in car rental. And you're beginning to see glimmers of what these new needs and the new innovation may be.
What do you expect innovation to kind of come from as a result of the pandemic?
So, go back to SARS in China. What happened after SARS? E-commerce just exploded. People were staying in place, and the big e-commerce platforms just, blossomed after that. So what's happening now, if you look at some of the car rental companies, they took a huge, huge hit. Hertz went bankrupt. So as they're coming back, they're finding new ways to engage with their customers, and they're finding new ways to meet needs that those customers will have. And it may not be renting a car, for a business trip, but it may be renting a car for the weekend, and not just renting a Ford, but renting a Maserati, right? If
Mm.
that's what you want to drive. And so I think that's what you're beginning to see this happening now. And it's new ways of engaging with people, and to understand their needs. And that is technology driven. That's digitally driven.
So where are we right now with this current recession? Are we at that point where we should really be thinking about growth, expanding our teams again? Are we over the hump, basically?
Well, so Asia, according to the OECD, this year looks like 5.7% growth. For the US, that's a good year. For Asia, it's probably not, right? Certainly not for China, but it's a lot better than EMEA, and it's a lot better than North America. So there will be growth. Will people be traveling as much? No, I don't think that's going to be till the end of the year. I think what we're seeing now is if the investments are put in the right place, or there's this trend towards investing with partners who may have been competitors before, but you should look at them differently, because together you can do something differently, whether it's in your own market, the national borders of your market, or cross-border. And there's also, you're seeing a phenomenon of, well, maybe I'll take a product that I was selling to one group, and I'm going to take that product and I'm going to sell it to a totally different group of customers that I'm going to find. And that's the stage we're in now. I think we're past the tipping point because of the vaccines around the world. And so the next 6 months will be absolutely critical in terms of who the winners and losers are going to be as we come out of this recession.
So how do we turn this around? Because I know there's a lot of companies that during the pandemic, they made cost cuts. Some staff went on leave or pay cuts. So there's been a lot of movements to try and survive. When do we go from survival to, actually pushing and reaching for the stars, as they say?
Well, I think it's going to be slow, and we do have to get out of a survival mentality. I mean, one of the things the Harvard Business Review study looked at was innovation, and they said things like the companies that succeeded most, those 9%, right, who flourished after those recessions, really, really nourished innovation within their own organizations. Things like creating an innovation committee, right, if you don't have one already. Creating an ecosystem of startups, who are doing things you never thought about, like the next Facebook and the next Airbnb, that you might be able to partner with and learn from as a what I call a legacy business. So it's probably thinking very, very differently about what you're going to move into, doing it with patience, keeping a smart allocation of your cash, right, and then paying very close attention to your people. Everyone's been through a lot, psychologically and otherwise. Paying close attention to, you need the people, your internal stakeholders, to be on board, because there's probably more change to come, and you need them to go with you.
What would be your key advice from everything that you've seen, all the clients that you deal with? What would be your advice to them to move ahead?
Well, I think it's the companies that do the best are well managed, and that's on a spectrum, but it starts from the top. It's what we call tone from the top, and that's what sets the not just the direction, but the climate within an organization. And so it's really the senior management team sitting down and saying, what is our tone from the top? How are we communicating that? It's not just internal stakeholders, it's investors, business partners. What are the ecosystems we're involved in? Because no one can do it alone. And the other big thing, by the way, that's come up is conveying a sense of purpose as an organization. The most successful companies, not exclusively, but quite generally, they convey a sense of purpose in the communities in which they operate. And I'm a big believer in that.
All right. Well, Monteith, I'd just like to say thank you very much for sharing some of your thoughts around this current hump that we're on. And I think it is positive news. We have something to look forward to in the year ahead with vaccines rolling out, with companies kind of getting back on the horse. So, I look forward to seeing what the rest of the year provides to us.
As do I and everyone else. Thanks, Felix. I really appreciate this opportunity.